Hello everyone, myself Professor Dharam Unadkat here with the subject Effective Technical Communication. So, in the first two videos of Module 1, we have covered topics like process of communication, dynamic communication, kinesics, proxemics, paralinguistic features, importance of interpersonal communication, importance of intercultural communication, and levels of communication. More topics of Module 1 can be further discussed in this video. Let's move further with the topic verbal and non-verbal communication. What is verbal communication? Verbal communication is nothing but the words that come out of our mouth to convey a message or idea via sound. Oral communication is the most used form of communication done with words. The various modes of verbal communication are face-to-face discussion, presentation, intercom, messages delivered on phones, telephonic conversation, radio, transmitter, Skyping or video chatting, speeches, interviews, etc. Let's have some reasons why oral communication is great because it saves time, it is more effective as emotions are well portrayed, the feedback loop is faster, verbal communication is economical, and the tone is easy to read. Let's have a look on some factors of effective verbal communication. First, think before you speak. By organizing your thought in advance, you can eliminate many of the awkward pauses that occur when speaking. It will also help you relay your information more consciously. While writing down your thought is not always possible in impromptu discussion, it is still effective to take a minute to organize your thoughts in your mind before you begin to speak. Second, speak with confidence. Speaking in a confident manner will help you build trust and command the request of your audience. There are several factors which can impact your ability to speak confidently, including your command of the subject matter, your word choice, the tone of your voice, your body language, and your ability to make direct eye contact with your audience. Third, be clear and conscious. The most effective way to get your point across is to make it in a clear and conscious manner. Avoid use complex sentences and try to state your argument in direct language. Before speaking, ask yourself, what is the clearest way I can make my point? Next, be aware of your non-verbal communication clues. Your body language significantly impacts the way others interpret what you say. Pay attention to your gesture you make, your facial expression, and your body language to ensure that align with the message you are trying to get across. Next, be a good listener. Being a good listener is as important as being a good speaker, as it will improve the quality of your verbal interaction. It shows the people you are speaking with that you are genuinely care about their ideas and it helps ensure you understand their needs. This will enable you to build a trust and rapport much quicker. And last, think about the perspective of your audience. Just because you have a strong command of a topic doesn't mean the people you are speaking to have the same knowledge as you. Try to think about how someone else will understand what you are trying to communicate, particularly if they lack the technical knowledge about the subject that you possess. So, these are all the factors of effective verbal communication. Next comes the non-verbal communication. What is non-verbal communication? Non-verbal communication occurs without using any oral or written word. Instead of written or oral word, it relies on various non-verbal clues like physical movement, task, color, sign, symbols, signals, charts, etc. to express feeling, attitude, or information. Although no word is used in the non-verbal communication, it can effectively communicate many human feelings more accurately than verbal methods of communication. Here are the types of non-verbal communication. Let's discuss one by one. First, the eye contact. Eye contact an important channel of interpersonal communication, helps to relate the flow of communication and it signals interest in others. Eye contact with audience increases the speaker's capability. Teachers who make eye contact open the flow of communication and convey interest, concern, warmth, and credibility. Second is the facial expression. The face is an important communicator. It is commonly said that face is the index of the mind. It expresses the type of emotion or feeling such as joy, love, interest, sorrow, anger, annoyance, confusion, fear, and uncertainty. Third comes the gesture. If you fail to gesture with speaking, you may be perceived as boring, stiff, and unanimated. Head nods, a form of gesture, communicate positive reinforcement to students and indicate that you are listening. Gestures are the movement of arms, legs, hands, and head. Some authors opine that gesture is the deliberate body movement as because they express specific and intentionally meaning. Next is the body language. Body language is another widely recognized form of non-verbal communication. Body movement can convey a meaning and message. Body language may take two forms of unconscious movement and consciously controlled movement. Next comes the space and distance. Space and distance are significant non-verbal tools in the case of organizational communication. A spacious and well-decorated room indicates a person's position in the organization hierarchy, and external people get some message about his importance and authority only by visiting his room. Next comes the silence. Silence is the powerful tool for communication. It may have a positive or negative meaning. In a classroom, silence indicates that students are listening carefully and attentively. In the same way, through silence, one can communicate his lack of interest or a failure to understand. And last comes the visual communication. When communication occurs by means of any visual aid, it is known as visual communication. Thus, communication that occurs through facial expression, personal appearance, gesture, posture, printed picture, sign, signals, symbols, map, posture, slide, chart, diagram, graph, etc. is called the visual communication. For example, to indicate danger, we use a red sign to mean dangerous. We use a skull faced between two pieces of bone put in crosswise fashion. To indicate no smoking, we use an image showing a lighted cigarette with a cross mark on it. So, this is an example of visual communication. Let's discuss one more time the types of non-verbal communications are eye contact, facial expression, gesture, body language, space and distance, silence, and visual communication. Next topic is barriers to communication. A barrier is defined as something that prevents or controls progress or movement. This definition implies that a barrier is something that comes in the way of a desired outcome. We all know that effective communication is the nerve of all the business activity in an organization. Even a slight break in the communication flow can lead to misunderstanding. Communication is effective only if it creates the desired impact on the receiver. Often, managers get frustrated in their efforts and end up saying that nobody in the organization understands them. If a particular communication fails to evoke the desired response, the following 5 steps can help to solve the problem. That is, identify the problem, find the cause or barrier, work on alternative solution, opt for the best solution, and follow up rigorously. These 5 steps can help you to evoke the desired response. Now, let's classify the barriers. To communicate smoothly and effectively in an organization, irrespective of your position, you need to know how barriers operate, why they cause misunderstanding, and how to minimize their negative impact. If we classify barriers according to the processes of message formation and delivery we can identify into three types. First, intrapersonal, second, interpersonal, and third, organizational. Let's understand the first type, that is intrapersonal barrier. Individuals are unique because of different in perception, experience, education, culture, and personality, etc. Each of us interprets the same information in different ways, as our thinking varies. Let us explore all the common causes that lead to this intrapersonal barrier. That is, wrong assumption, varied perception, differing background, wrong interference, blocked categories, and last is the categorical thinking. Let's understand wrong assumption in detail. Many barriers stem from wrong assumption. For example, when a doctor tells her patient that he has to take some medicines only SOS, that is, during an emergency, without knowing whether the patient understands the term SOS, she is creating a barrier in their communication. Here, the doctor has made a wrong assumption about her patient's level of knowledge. Wrong assumptions are generally made because the sender or the receiver does not have adequate knowledge about the other's background or entertains certain false concepts which are fixed in his or her mind. To strengthen your skills as a communicator, try to put yourself in the shoes of the listeners. This exercise will prevent making wrong assumptions about the receivers. Now, let's understand the differing background in detail. No two persons have the same background. Backgrounds can be different due to different education, cultural, language, environment, etc. Our background plays a significant role in how we interpret a message. Think of a class where the professor talks about his rock climbing adventure. Students who have experienced rock climbing may be able to appreciate the professor's talk, while others who have never been into adventure sports may not find it interesting at all. To enhance communication skill, it is necessary to know the background of the audience. So, these are the examples of intrapersonal barriers. Second type is interpersonal barriers. Intrapersonal barriers stem from an individual's attitude or habits, whereas interpersonal barrier occurs due to the inappropriate transaction of words between two or more peoples. The two broad categories into which these barriers can be classified are insufficient communication skills and negative aspects nurturing in the climate. The most common reasons for interpersonal barriers are limited vocabulary, incompatibility of verbal or non-verbal messages, emotional outburst, communication selectivity, and poor listening skill. Let's understand this in detail. First, limited vocabulary. Inadequate vocabulary can be a major hindrance in communication. At times, we find ourselves searching for the exact word or phrase that would be appropriate for what we are trying to express. For example, during a speech, if you are at the loss of words, your communication will be very ineffective and you will leave a poor impression on the audience. On the other hand, if you have a varied and substantial vocabulary, you can create a favorable impression on your listeners. Second, communication selectivity. When the receiver in the communication process pays attention only to the part of the message, he or she is imposing a barrier known as communication selectivity. This happens because he or she is interested only in that part of the message which may be of use of his or her. In such situation, the sender is not at fault. It is the receivers who breaks the flow of communication. And the third type is organizational barrier. Communication barriers are not only limited to an individual or two people but exist in entire organization. Every organization, irrespective of its size, has its own communication techniques and each nurtures in its own communication climate. The main organizational barriers are as follows: too many transfer stations, fear of superiors, negative tendencies, use of inappropriate media, and information overload. Let's understand these in detail. Too many transfer stations. The more links there are in the communication chain, the greater are the chances of miscommunication. Imagine, for instance, that your professor asks you to convey a message to X student. You, because of some inconveniences, ask your Y friend to do this job. Now, there are four people involved in this communication channel. Whatever the reason for filtering or distorting the message, having too many transfer stations is always an obstacle to effective communication and should be avoided. Transfer stations do not serve a purpose, but having too many of them is counterproductive. Next, information overload. One of the major problems faced by organizations today is the decrease in efficiency resulting from manual handling of huge amount of data. This is known as information overload. The usual result of information overload are disinterest and boredom. Very often, vital, relevant information gets mixed up with too many irrelevant detail and is therefore ignored by the receiver. Thus, the quality of information is much more important than the quantity. To reduce information overload in an organization, screening of information is mandatory. Message should be directed only to those people who are likely to benefit from the information. Major points should be highlighted, leaving out all irrelevant detail. Thank you. So, here we have completed the module number 1, which contains all the topic in all the 3 videos. Once again, thank you all.